But Ken, let me start with you. Explain exactly what happened in court today there in South Florida. Trump's Mar-a-Lago property manager, Carlos de Oliveira, now faces an August 10 deadline to get a lawyer.
Yeah, that's right, Kristen. Like a lot of people of limited means, he wasn't able to immediately find a white-collar defense attorney to respond to these obstruction of justice charges. Now, very often a judge will allow a public defender to stand in for an arraignment, which is a simple plea and a reading of the charges, but that didn't happen today. So he had his first appearance in court. He was released on $100,000 surety bond, and he's coming back. What was interesting is the magistrate judge said today that Judge Aileen Cannon wanted to make sure that he got arraigned before the next scheduled hearing to debate the procedures on classified information. So that suggests to me that she is still interested in trying to move this case along and make that May trial deadline.
All right. Well, stand by for me, Ken. Garrett, let me turn to you now. What has the reaction been from within the Trump campaign? We got this new polling today. 37-point lead over Ron DeSantis, his closest rival. And of course, it comes with all of these legal challenges looming large over him.
Well, Donald Trump has surprisingly only reposted that poll once so far. I would expect to see it more. But broadly speaking, their answer has been, we told you so. I mean, they feel like he has been the runaway favorite in this race, really since the New York indictment. They've argued for a long time that these indictments don't hurt him at all, that they feel like they have pretty effectively weaponized them, not just against Joe Biden, but against the rest of the field, where they've forced everyone to basically pick a side. You're with, the liberal DOJ, or you're with Donald Trump. And what they're seeing from voters is that they are with Donald Trump. So they feel very secure in this position. And I think it's more fuel for their idea that further indictments won't hurt him. Now, obviously, that's an experiment we haven't run yet. The potential charges, certainly the potential cases we're talking about here with the 2020 election, are much more serious and more readily accessible in the minds of most voters. But, this is something where they're saying, look, this is our field, and if you're still firing at Trump, you're shooting the wrong direction.
Yeah, I mean, it is extraordinary because there's a big question mark over how the indictments piling up would impact him. It seems like he's increasingly emboldened, and yet things change once he gets into the heart of the campaign season, once he's actually in the thick of it and voters are going to the polls and he's potentially dealing with court appearances. How much concern is there? Is there any concern inside Trump world about the optics of that, about what impact that could have?
The optics less than the logistics, right? It's difficult to run a structured campaign when you might have to show up for an arraignment or a court appearance. It's hard to schedule where you can be if you don't know when the other shoe's going to drop, and somebody else, the Justice Department in this case, is pulling the strings. But in terms of the optics, again, they feel like this is something they can lean into. And if they're still beating their closest Republican challenger by 30 some odd points, they can make that argument that this is all about going after Joe Biden and look how Joe Biden's going after us. So I think they feel like they can work within that space if it comes to that. It's the logistics that are as much a problem as anything else. But again, with a lead that big, you don't have to do a lot of events to hold your position.
No, you're absolutely right about then that. Chuck, help us to sort of orient ourselves from a legal perspective. We are obviously in this extraordinary moment where, as the former president himself has said, there could be another indictment any day now in the January 6th case, a possible indictment coming Fulton County, Georgia, where Blayne is. Of all of these cases you're tracking, where do you see the biggest legal jeopardy for the president?
Well, there's always jeopardy, Kristen, if you're a defendant in a criminal case. One way of sort of examining your good question is which case is the most compelling. Another way of examining it would be, which case might lead to the most jail time if Mr. Trump is convicted. But let me take the first one. The most compelling case, in my view, would be the one for which he received a target letter just 2 weeks ago. The events related, I should say the activities related to January 6th and trying to overturn a fair and free election. To me, that presents an enormous threat to our democracy and would be the most compelling criminal case. By the way, the fact that he received a target letter strongly suggests that he's soon to be indicted on that basis. So I think that's the most compelling case. It's certainly the most dangerous case. And if convicted of those charges, it would be literally unprecedented. We use that word a lot, unprecedented, but the notion that a president of the United States would try to thwart the peaceful transition of power is extraordinary. That is the most compelling case to me, Kristen.
And Chuck, I've been watching your analysis for a number of days now. You've been very clear that a target letter is a pretty significant sign that we can have confidence that an indictment is coming. Talk a little bit about why. And also, you've expressed some questions about Smith's strategy of lumping all of these defendants in together. Talk about the potential challenges around that as well, if you would.
Sure. So first question first, Kristen, the last thing you want to do today is go home, open your mail, and find a target letter. It means that the Department of Justice has decided that you are a putative defendant, someone who is likely to be charged with a crime, and has told you so in writing. When I was a federal prosecutor, I occasionally sent out target letters, never as a bluff, never as a feint. It was never a game. It was deadly serious, meaning we are going to charge you. We're going to ask a grand jury to return a true bill, an indictment. And so because he received a target letter, we ought to expect that he will be charged with federal crimes and soon. To your second question, I think it's a difficult call for prosecutors when they decide to put a number of defendants at the table sitting next to Mr. Trump. There's a great disparity, of course, between the former president and relatively low-level workers at Mar-a-Lago. Moreover, it may take the jury's focus off of Mr. Trump, and it may also complicate the government's case in the following way. With 3 defendants, you have 3 defense teams. With 3 defense teams, you have 3 defense opening statements, you have 3 defense closing arguments, and each and every government witness is cross-examined 3 times. So I don't mean to suggest that they got it wrong. All I'm saying, Kristen, is that it can be a difficult strategic decision. Obviously, the Smith team had good reasons for doing it. My preference might have been, in a perfect world in which we do not live, to have the president sitting alone at a defense table. But that's not what we're going to get, unless, of course, Mr. Nada and Mr. De Oliveira decide to plead guilty and cooperate against him. But right now, 3 defense teams representing 3 defendants.
Well, fascinating and a lot to watch as we wait for the next potential court case. And with that, Ken, let me go back to you and ask you about the fact, of course, as we've been saying, that De Oliveira's, wasn't able to find a counsel. And so his trial has been delayed. Do you have a sense of how long and how that could impact the overall proceedings here?
Well, his trial date would be the same. It's the May date that Judge Aileen Cannon has set for this proceeding. What's delayed is his arraignment, which is simply the reading of the charges, and he would enter a plea. And so he had his first appearance today. He'll eventually be arraigned. He's got a lawyer now. It's just his lawyer is not admitted to practice in the Southern District of Florida. But because he has a lawyer, that lawyer can begin getting ready to answer these charges. So there really isn't an excuse. The addition of a 3rd defendant and a new obstruction of justice conspiracy arguably could be a reason to delay this trial a little bit. But there are many experts that we've been talking to who do think that they can, if they put their mind to it, they can get this tried by May of next year if Judge Aileen Cannon really wants that to happen. Of course, there's going to be litigation about many issues, and there may be appeals, and that could really throw a wrench into things and delay things.
Blayne, let me turn to you now in Georgia, where today a judge rejected the former president's attempts to basically quash the grand jury report that could potentially lead to an indictment there. Of course, a grand jury investigating efforts to overturn the 2020 election. What can you tell us about this and about a potential indictment based on what we're hearing from DA Fani Willis?
Well, Kristen, this really is kind of the latest blow to the former president and his legal team in their efforts to try and preemptively fight any potential charges that may come here in Fulton County. So the former president's legal team has made 3 different attempts through a number of different filings to essentially get this whole thing to go away. They're asking that DA Fani Willis be disqualified from investigating the former president. They're asking that the special grand jury's report itself be quashed and just not even allowed to be considered. Well, the first attempt before a Georgia Supreme Court. That was struck down several days ago unanimously. The second was struck down today by a judge here in Fulton County Superior Court. And in a footnote, the judge who wrote that order, Judge Robert McBurney, indicated that his decision today could possibly nullify that third report that's still hanging out there. So really, if that is the case, what that would do is that would clear the way for any potential charges to actually stick if they were to come in this case. Now, that clears the way, of course, Kristen, for your second question, which is timing. And we have to say that we do fully expect to see Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis announce her charging decisions within the next 3 weeks. This is kind of the time frame that she's set forward. She's very clear that she wants to do it before September 1st. She put out that letter that we all remember to local law enforcement saying, hey, between July 31st and August 18th, I'm having most of my staff work from home. Please don't schedule any sort of in-person trials here at the courthouse. We really want to shore up security around the courthouse. So that's certainly the strongest indication that she is preparing to present possible indictments against high-level figures in her investigation. The other thing, Kristen, that we know is that there are two grand juries that are currently seated, Grand Jury A, Grand Jury B. We know that one of those grand juries is who she's going to be presenting her case to in the weeks ahead, Kristen.
Blayne, let me follow up with you quickly. You talked about security. What type of preparation specifically are you starting to see there? How robust is the security presence?
Well, you can see some of them behind me right now. We're talking about a few orange barricades that have lined the front of this courthouse. It's not something that we typically see here. Those started going up over the weekend. The other thing is we expect it to kind of ramp up over the next few days, and that's because security is something that has long been on the DA's mind. You know, she has talked about it with reporters over the past year, including me, saying that she's upped her own security. She's received a number of personal threats. She wanted the FBI to come in and make sure that security was up to snuff here at the courthouse, and it's something that she addressed over the weekend. Take a look.
Obviously, I sent a letter to the sheriff that leaked immediately almost and to other county officials saying that I thought that some people may not be happy with the decisions that I was making. And sometimes when people are unhappy, they act in a way that could create harm. I'm not willing to put my employees in harm's way. I'm not willing to put any of the employees or the constituents that come to the courthouse in harm's way.
So you heard her right there. She doesn't want to put anybody in harm's way. Again, that's why she kind of blocked off this 3-week time period. Again, the strongest indication that we could see charging decisions very soon, Kristen.
Okay, well, I know it's a busy time for you, Blayne. Garrett, let me turn back to you. Obviously, the Trump team watching all of these cases very carefully, but you say they really have their sights trained on Georgia. Why?
Yeah, my sources in Trump world have always indicated that Georgia's the one they're worried the most about for a variety of reasons. The first is that the evidence is the easiest for people to understand. This is one with the famous phone call asking for votes. This played out in front of people in a way that January 6th did as well, but the case here is just very straightforward and easy to understand. Also, their attorneys here are a different set from everywhere else where they're working, and it's a case that's outside the federal system, so it's one where even if Mr. Trump won the White House, he wouldn't be in a position to pardon himself. Everything about Georgia, I forgot one other, the jury pool in Atlanta would be presumably much more favorable, much more anti-Trump. So everything about that particular case is kind of the one that the Trump people have circled on their calendars.
It's great reporting from inside Trump world. Garrett, Chuck, let me just ask you finally, according to the Washington Post, there has been a super PAC has basically spent more than $40 million on legal costs this year alone. And there's reporting also that Smith is interested in how lawyers for witnesses are being paid. Talk about the significance of all of this. What types of red flags does this potentially raise?
Yeah, a couple of red flags. So, I mean, first impression, of course, Kristen, is that Mr. Trump generates a lot of work for white-collar criminal defense lawyers. But hypothetically, imagine there was an investigation at NBC and you, Kristen, were being questioned just as a witness, somebody who might have pertinent information. It would be perfectly okay for NBC to pay for your lawyer. She must have your confidence. She owes to you a duty of loyalty and confidentiality. If she was working on your behalf, she would have to help you make decisions in your best interest. The problem arises, of course, the red flag arises when that lawyer being paid for by NBC is actually working on behalf of NBC, Kristen, and not on behalf of you. So one thing all of these witnesses in these cases and now several other defendants have to ensure is that the lawyer, even if they're being paid for by a third party, are acting in their own best interests. That's a red flag. Another red flag, of course, would be if a lawyer is representing multiple witnesses or multiple defendants and conflicts arise among those clients. Right. And so this is something the government has to watch very carefully. And if it is a concern, bring to the attention of a judge, perhaps seek to have one of the lawyers recused to get other counsel for a witness or a defendant if they don't think they're being appropriately represented. It's a sticky matter because courts don't really want to interpose themselves between a lawyer and a client. So lots of possible red flags, lots of things to watch carefully for. But the mere fact that a third party is paying for a lawyer, in and of itself, that's okay.
Can you always make, Chuck, I should say, you always make very complicated things a lot easier to understand. We appreciate that. Ken, one final question to you. Will Jack Smith's decision in any way be impacted by what happens down in Georgia?
I don't think so, Kristen, is the answer. We can't know for sure. We can't know whether these two groups of prosecutors are consulting with one another. But Jack Smith is a pretty independent guy. And whenever I ask whether any other factors are influencing his decisions, whether politics, whether logistics, whether media, when I ask people in this building where I am, they say absolutely not. He's got one goal here, and that is to pursue justice in these two investigations.
All right. Well, everyone is watching and waiting.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.